Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Savannah Book Festival 2021 virtual season. I'm Ariel Felton. I am a local writer as well as a teaching artist and publications manager for Deep Center, which is a local nonprofit that does creative arts and writing workshops with our young people. I'm also the managing editor of Penelope Editions, the YA imprint of Penny Candy Books, which is an independent children's book publishing company. Tonight, Savannah Book Festival is delighted to present Brit Bennett, author of New York Times bestseller The Mothers, and most recently, the instant New York Times bestseller The Vanishing Half. Oops, sorry. Her second novel. Born and raised in Southern California, Brit Bennett graduated from Stanford University and later earned her MFA in fiction at the University of Michigan, where she won a Hopwood Award in graduate short fiction. In 2014, she received the Hurston Wright Award for college writers. She's a National Book Foundation 5 under 35 honoree, and her essays have been featured in The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, the Paris Review, and Jezebel. You can purchase The Vanishing Half from the festival booksellers through the link just below this stream. And over the next hour, I'll have the pleasure of speaking with Brit Bennett about her work, and later she'll answer questions submitted during the talk. To submit a question, please click Ask a Question also on the bottom of the screen and type it in. And we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible tonight. Welcome, Brit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So we'll just dive right in. We'll start with The Vanishing Half. I think that one of my favorite things about the book is that you capture the Deep South so perfectly for a Cali girl. So my first question is, do you have Southern roots and family?
I do. I feel like a lot of us do. A lot of us California people. Um, but yeah, my dad is from Los Angeles. Actually, he was born and raised in LA, but my mom is from Louisiana.
Mhm.
So I trace, half of my family kind of to the West Coast, half of my family to Louisiana, and that's kind of where the book takes us in parts to both of those kind of braids of my family history.
Yeah, yeah. So The Vanishing Half is set in the town of Mallard, Louisiana. It's a Black town that strives to marry lighter and lighter. So their children are lighter and lighter. And at first, I thought this town was completely made up, but I think I read that you were actually inspired by another town. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it came from the idea for the town came from a town that my mother told me she'd heard about when she was a girl growing up in Louisiana. So it was something that she mentioned to me very offhandedly, the idea of a place like this, which I had never conceived of growing up in San Diego in the 90s.
Right.
So she kind of told me about this town, I think she said her mother told her about when she was a girl. And then in the process of writing the book, I started to research to see if places like this were real, because to me it sounded very mythological almost.
Mhm.
And I, discovered similar towns to of these kind of small insular Creole communities that were very obsessed with color.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So the book is set around two twins, and we have Desiree, who kind of rebels against this entire idea of marrying lighter and lighter by marrying, I think the book says, the darkest man she could find. So he unfortunately becomes verbally and physically abusive, and I'm just wondering how much of his actions are a result of, like Desiree's mother said, the fact that he envies her light skin.
Yeah, I mean, I think writing that relationship was really complicated because when Desiree marries this guy, her mother and her community views this as a rejection of the town and their values, and that's all it could be. They cannot really conceive of the fact that she could actually love Sam. They only think that she's just trying to kind of rebel. In writing that relationship, I didn't want that marriage to kind of affirm what these people in the town are thinking, like that they're believing the worst about this relationship. That being said, it is a bad relationship, and
Mhm.
to me, it's kind of all of those things. It's sort of bad, independent of what her town and her community believes. But I also think of Sam as this character whose life has been informed by his experiences in color, by the way that he has been treated his whole life, by white people and by other Black people. So I think it's all of those things. I think that, that relationship goes south, because of who Sam is, but also because of the things that he has experienced that have turned him into somebody who becomes very bitter. And I think often abusers are people who have been abused, and also people who are looking for anyone to exert power over. And in this case, the person that he can most exert his power over is his wife.
Right, right. It's almost like a cycle at that point. I remember when Desiree and Sam had first met, he was making jokes about, how he wouldn't even be welcomed back home where she was from. And it plays out when she does go home. Her mom says, basically confirming what Desiree, what she thought. So Stella's the twin that rebels even further, I guess, by deciding to pass as white and creating a whole new life for herself. You've said before that you were not interested in writing a book that judged Stella for these decisions. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I set out to write a book about passing, I think at least for me, when I first started thinking about passing, I often thought about it in this like, if I were in her shoes, would I have made this choice? Like, I often thought about it in those terms. But over time, that became less interesting to me, of judging her or thinking about whether she did whether she did the right thing or the wrong thing, or is it good or is it bad? All of that felt so simple and really uninteresting. And ultimately, I became a lot more interested in sort of how does this choice change her life? What does this look like 20 years from now? Like, you've made this very radical decision and now you are like kind of living in it. What does
Right.
that look like as time goes by? How do you, do you remain committed to the performance? Does the performance break down? All of that was more interesting to me than is it good or bad that Stella has done this thing. So I think in general, literature about passing can often be very moralizing.
Mhm.
And for me, that's the least interesting thing to do in writing, is to moralize. I don't care about whether what characters have done is good or bad. I just want to think about, like, how do they live with that choice, whether it's good or bad or anything in between, as most of our actions are.
Right, right. And speaking of, when we follow Stella into this life, I think the first scene that we see of her new life is when a Black family is moving into the neighborhood. And it's weird. It kind of like she acts really strangely towards this family. It's like she wants to be in community with them, but she also knows, or she also fears that they will figure out her secret. I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about writing that tension of like being a Black person, wanting that community, but also having to fear it because of choices that you've made.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the dynamic that I found really fraught and really fun to kind of explore. Because on one hand, you have Stella, who, she's in kind of the most precarious position that she could possibly be in, where there's a Black family not only kind of moving into her neighborhood, but also moving directly across the cul-de-sac from her. Like, they can look
Mhm.
into her house. And that's something that she has been running from and avoiding and hiding from for most of her adult life. So that's something that puts her in danger. But on the flip side, there's this feeling of community that she is seeking, and a feeling of almost sisterhood that she's seeking with the wife of that family. And I think that that's one of the most fun dynamics to write about in fiction, is when a character wants an impossible thing, and
Mhm.
she wants something impossible in this situation. She wants to kind of maintain the safety and security of her life with her husband and her child in this white neighborhood, in this kind of world that she's committed to. But she also wants sisterhood with this Black woman who moves in across the street. And when you create a situation where there's no way the character can kind of get both things, I think that becomes the most kind of fun. It sounds very sounds very kind of like masochistic, but that's like, I think that's a fun dynamic to explore in fiction, where this person wants the impossible and they're
Right.
going to be like kind of torn between those things. So for me, it was about that. It was about kind of creating this set of conflicting desires that Stella wants, and showing how she is just completely unmoored as she tries to have both things that she cannot possibly have at the same time.
Right, right. I felt bad for her, but at the same time, it was kind of like, well, you made this choice, and I'm not sure I'm not sure how easy that you thought it was going to be, I guess. Um, so twins are great and really popular literary device. I was reminded of Jesmyn Ward's Where the Line Bleeds, where she's writing about twin boys when I was reading yours. I'm wondering, were there any like cliches about twins that you were really trying to like avoid because they're such a popular literary device?
Yeah, I think that there were lots of those. I think my experience of encountering twins in any type of storytelling, whether it's books or TV or whatever, I think often there's either this sense that they are kind of clones, or they're like sort of inseparable from each other,
Hmm.
or the sense that they're like polar opposites in every way. I remember reading this book as a child that was like, this is Bobby and this is Johnny, and like Bobby likes hot things, Johnny likes cold things. That was like the whole, like,
That's how twins
the
work.
point of yeah, and like obviously the point of the book is to teach you about like opposites because you're a child, but that's
Hmm.
often I think the way that I think of like the Tia and Tamara, like that kind of
Oh yeah,
dichotomy
favorite
of
twins.
twins. Yeah, of course. So that kind of dichotomy of twins, and I wanted something kind of in between because I felt like I think these characters are very much different from each other, but at the same time they grew up together. They were very close, like they shared lots of experiences, so there would be overlap in the ways in which they see the world, although it's not identical. So I wanted to kind of be between those areas. And I think, the thing that I think also is that because it's a book that's sort of about estranged twins, and that was I think one of the challenges of the book was writing about these twins who are so close to each other emotionally, but spend most of the book physically apart, or a large part of the book physically apart. And how then do you maintain and craft that twin relationship? And I think but I think that's not maybe as common of a narrative about twins, than the ones that we normally encounter.
Right, right. I was gonna say, I feel like often they have like some psychic ability where they just like know each other's every thought. But we find
Yeah.
out later that Stella's been keeping quite a few secrets from Desiree. So, do you have a favorite twin or a twin that was easier to get in the head of and like capture their voice than the other one?
Yeah, I don't think I have a favorite, but I love them equally.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, I definitely think that Desiree was easier to get in the voice of. I think Desiree was just like a very dynamic and kind of big personality, and she's funny and like has like funny and kind of real observations about things. And I
Hmm.
loved writing her story of she's somebody who dreams of having this really big life, and she ultimately doesn't really.
Right.
She ends up back at this small town that she wanted to escape, but she does have a life that's fulfilling. And I felt found that really appealing, and interesting. I think that with Stella, she's such a kind of guarded person.
Hmm.
She's a really guarded and interior character. She keeps all those secrets, as you said. And that I think in a lot of ways was difficult to write, of how do I sort of craft this character who doesn't want anybody to know her. I think those
Right.
characters can be really hard to get to know, and the way that people who are like that are hard to get to know.
Mhm, mhm. What about, your readers? Do you ever get, like, comments that are like, "Oh my god, I could not stand this twin," or "I prefer this twin over the other one?"
It's interesting because I expected that writing it. I really thought people were
Mhm.
going to hate Stella because she makes a lot of choices that are, some difficult choices and some
Mhm.
unpopular choices, some unsavory choices perhaps. But I think I've been mostly surprised by the readers who are like, I hated what she did, but I didn't hate her. Like she frustrated me, or, there's that type of reaction more than just like I couldn't stand her. It's more just
Right.
like I think that to me is like the way that you feel when you like somebody and they do something that you don't, like someone you care about or you like does something
Mhm,
bad. You're not
mhm.
necessarily like, I hate them, but you're just like,
Right,
oh man, why did like that's kind of the reaction. I was like, oh, why did she do that? And to
right.
me, I love that reaction because it shows, I think, that they had complicated feelings about the character. It wasn't all just like I love her or I hate her.
Mhm, mhm. Agreed, agreed. When reading her, it was like I I understand the decisions that you made, even if I don't think that I would have made, the same ones.
Yeah.
So this book spans into the next generation, and we get to spend a lot of time with each twin's daughter. I'm wondering, what topics were you looking to kind of further explore that you felt like you couldn't get through with the twins, but that you could talk about with their daughters?
Yeah, I think I was just really curious of what this family would be like in the next generation. We move ahead in time, so the kind of generation in which their daughters are growing up is just different. It's a post-civil rights generation, so their experience of race is going to be different than their mothers. And I think, I think I was interested in that and seeing kind of where these twins would, or where their children would be located. And then I just also just became really interested in like the fact that their daughters are, genetically half siblings, but
Mhm.
they grow up so differently from one another. They grow up with different levels of knowledge about the family history. They grow up wanting different things, and to see how those twins and their children end up all being different from each other. So I think all of it. I didn't set out to do that to make it kind of this multi-generational story. I never thought I was
Mhm.
going to do that. I just thought originally I thought the story would be about the twins. I thought one half would be Desiree and the other half of the book would be Stella, and that would be it. But then as time went by, I became really interested in Jude, who grows up in
Mhm.
Mallard. And the more I wrote about Jude, the more I was kind of like, okay, now I want to know about her counterpart. What's
Right.
Stella's daughter like? So it was something that kind of snuck up on me as I was working on the book. But I'm glad I was able to explore it and kind of take the family into that next generation.
Right, right. I agree. So I'm wondering, so Desiree's daughter ends up being or looking a lot like Sam, dark skin. And I'm wondering, even though Desiree is so happy about this, she actually, I think she says that she doesn't want to love another person that looks exactly like her. And that's why she's so happy that her daughter looks like Sam. Um, as Desiree was raised, do you think that she has like the kind of the qualifications to raise such a dark-skinned little girl, especially considering that she takes her back to Mallard, knowing like what sort of town that's like? Like what responsibility is that on the mother to like protect her from those types of thoughts and stuff?
Yeah, I think that was something that I felt was also really interesting in thinking about this book of that relationship between Desiree and Jude. Because on one hand, Desiree is, I think she's loving towards her daughter. I think she tries her best.
Mhm.
But at the same time, her experience growing up in this town is completely different than her daughter's experience. She kind of grows up as the sort of, golden child in a way. She and her sister are sort of, results of this social experiment, and it's like this is the successful result that we want from the social experiment in this town, which is
Right.
basically trying to genetically engineer a lighter population. They are the success of that attempt. Her daughter is the opposite of that. She's kind of the failure of that attempt. So I think there are ways in which Desiree does try her best to protect her daughter and to shield her, but there are also ways in which she has no kind of sense of what her daughter could possibly be experiencing. And also, I think ways in which she knows that this is going to be bad for her daughter. Like she knows that it's going to be bad when she brings her there. But she does it because that is what she considers sort of her best option at the time. Like you're choosing between bad and worse.
Mhm.
So to me, that was a really complex dynamic, and I wanted to think about, the ways in which, Desiree is hurt, knowing that her daughter is hurting, but kind of feels like there's nothing she can do about it. And I think that that's a really fraught and that's just a really fraught and bad. I think. I mean, I imagine as a parent, that's got to be kind of the worst position to be in, where that it's bad that your kid lives where they live, but you feel like there's nothing else you can do to protect them from it. So I wanted to think about that and think about the way in which that shapes that relationship, because again, I think it's a relationship that remains pretty close, but also I think that Jude has some, in my mind, very reasonable resentments that she kind of has against her mother for bringing her to this town and not preparing her for it, not really protecting her from it. She kind of tries to tell Jude like everything's going to be fine, knowing that it's not going to be fine. Which I think is understandable to imagine why a parent would want to do that, but also you can understand from Jude's point of view why that's something that ultimately is hurtful.
Right, right. It's like what they say when like young people are being bullied. It's like, oh, well, they're just insecure and it'll, in a couple
Exactly.
of years you'll be out of school. It's like, well, I'm in school right now. And I need
Yeah,
to do
that
this.
doesn't help anybody. Yeah, exactly.
And even at home from her grandmother is always trying to like keep her out of the sun or like have her wear hats. I think the only thing she shuts down is the bleaching cream. I'm wondering, is her grandmother someone that um you think could have learned to kind of or could have unlearned some of those stereotypes about what dark skin means and the value that she puts in light skin, especially considering that her daughter is so dark?
I think maybe, but to me, really, it was like Adele is like the sort of perfect encapsulation of the values of the town.
Right.
She is somebody who is like bought into it wholesale, believes it, and Desiree is like progress from that point of view. But I thought of it as that. I mean, I think that I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's me being a little cynical, but I think like it can be easy to think like, oh, and then if you're somebody who like is against interracial relationships, and then your child marries someone of a different race, you're going to change your mind.
Right, people say that
Um,
all the time.
yeah, and I think that some people that probably happens too. Or if you have a kid who's gay and you are homophobic, like some people maybe they'll change their mind when this becomes when they start having personal interactions and all of that. Some people I think do, but other people I think don't. And I think that with Adele, I think she cares about Jude. But she thinks that what would be helpful to Jude is like, well, what if I just help her get lighter? Or what if I help her not be darker? That's in her mind the thing that would be helpful. So it's not that it's, oh, well, let me try to make her, build her up so she loves herself or, protect her from the harms of this town. It's like, no, well, let me make her be the thing that would make people in the town treat her better. Like that's how she's thinking about it. So I think of her as a person who does mean well, but ultimately is harmful. And I don't know if it's possible for her. I mean, I guess it's always possible for anyone to change. But I think as I was working on the character, I never
Mhm.
considered a version of Adele where she suddenly has like accepted, like, I just like, no, this woman has grown up in this town. Like generations of her family have come from this town. This is all she has known, and she's not going to sort of have a change of heart because this is her granddaughter. I think in her mind, it's like, well, what can I do to help her be this thing that will have people treat her better instead of thinking like she always will think that the problem is with Jude and not with the town. And I think that that's like a tragic thing, but to me that felt like a real thing.
Right, right. It's like changing the child to fit the world instead of the kind of the other way around.
Exactly.
Um, All right. So I'm going to switch and talk about the mothers for a little bit, which for folks, if you haven't read, is a story about teenage pregnancy. And my first question is often when we get books like this, I feel like that choice of whether to terminate the pregnancy or not is like the choice that we're like building up to. But in this book, it happens very fast. It's kind of like the starting point. I'm wondering what got you interested in kind of the like after side of such a popular, again, story to tell.
I mean, I think it's exactly what you said. It was something that had not seen that much of. I think about something like what was the movie Knocked Up,
Mhm.
where I remember that movie. It was like a raunchy comedy, and they couldn't even say like abortion in the movie. Like there was
Right.
like a joke about nobody wanting to say the word abortion in this like raunchy R-rated comedy, or even something like Juno, where the character gets discouraged in the opening moments from terminating the pregnancy
Mhm.
because she's told that like the fetus has fingernails at that point or something. And obviously these things happen because these are stories that are about pregnancy, and so you need a pregnancy to happen just to write the story. So that would be a different story if those characters had decided to terminate their pregnancies. But I think that that was something that I always felt kind of interested in. Is what if we think of the way that an abortion is starting a story instead of the fact that it's ended one. I think we think of it as an end, but I'm like, what if it's actually the beginning to another part of this character's life and the way that it is for so many people? So I think a lot of it was that I was thinking of that felt kind of like an undertold story. There was never a version of this book that I imagined where Nadia had not terminated that pregnancy. And I just wanted that to be the kind of opening of the book, and for the rest of the book to kind of follow how that one choice leads to other choices in her life and how it affects her and her boyfriend at the time and the rest of the people in the church community.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of her boyfriend, that's another point of view that I feel like we don't get a lot of. A young man, a young Black man's like kind of response to a terminated pregnancy. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach that point of view?
Yeah, I think that that point of view was difficult for me to write, to be honest, as a woman. I think often when we talk about abortion, the thoughts and opinions of men are centered in a way that is really frustrating to me. So when I first started to think about Luke's point of view, there was a part of me that resisted that and felt that I
Mhm.
didn't want to center what a man thought about what a woman was doing with her body in the way that it's centered in our political discourse. But then I ultimately also thought, what if Nadia is the one who wants to terminate the pregnancy and Luke is the one who does not want to do that? Because I think earlier when I first started writing the book, I was like, oh, yeah, well, obviously Luke wants her to get this abortion and he's going to like
Mhm.
push her to do it. And that's kind of the expected narrative. But I started to think about the opposite. And I actually ended up reading different books and from the perspectives of men whose partners had terminated their pregnancies. I went to various message boards where men were
Mhm.
talking about their feelings about this, and some of them took me down some pretty dark kind of men's rights activist spaces, but some of them also were very just genuine, these feelings of these guys who felt like they were experiencing something and they knew that it was something that was not their bodies, but they still had complex emotional experiences about it and were navigating the kind of thorny gender politics of that.
Mhm.
And also, we're navigating the fact that as men, they are not encouraged to feel anything. So to see these men like talking to each other about that online was so fascinating to me. So that perspective of that character became something that was really unexpected, and also I think pushed and challenged me as a writer to kind of challenge my own kind of preconceptions about this, which I think had been colored by like our very toxic political discourse, and think about actually what real people are thinking and feeling as they're experiencing something like an abortion, which is so much more complicated than our politics would lead you to believe.
Right, right, and not to mention that they're both raised in, like, this very religious community, both of all of their parents, like, work in the church, so that pressure, like, coming from them from that side is, like, a whole 'nother, point of view. I wanna talk a bit about Aubrey's character, so she's, like, this devout, like, church member, volunteer, and kind of do-gooder, and she soon becomes, like, the 3rd triangle point in this relationship. Do you think it is that quality of her goodness or purity that attracts both Nadia and Luke after they've kind of made this or decided to terminate a pregnancy?
I think so. I think for Nadia, there's a way in which she is very judgy about Aubrey in the beginning, and she thinks of her as this like, oh, goody two shoes, whatever. But I think she is drawn to Aubrey both because Aubrey is someone who grows up without a mother, and she sees that they have that in common, which is kind of unexpected because she imagined that Aubrey had this perfect life of two parents and the dog or whatever.
Mhm.
So I think there's that element of it. And I think it also is like the fact that Aubrey is somebody who she thinks of as being very good and sort of pure. And that is something that Nadia is not. It's not how she sees herself. It's not how other people see her. So she's drawn to that. And I think in the case of Luke, it's the same thing. Aubrey is somebody who, when they kind of encounter each other, she shows him kindness, for reasons that he doesn't quite understand and reasons that he doesn't really deserve. And that is the thing that I think really draws him to her. So yeah, I loved the idea of that being this triangle of these kind of complicated dynamics.
Mhm.
I think Aubrey was the character that I feel so bad for her. I think about the things that she experiences in this book, I've had lots of people yell at me about that, which
Oh,
is
no.
fair, I think. She's a character that I think she's the type of character you really do want to protect. But I think also I think it's not the most interesting storytelling if you feel like you've got to shield your characters from bad things happening to them, unfortunately. So Aubrey's a character, she goes through a lot, but I think that I love that the relationship she has with both of them. I think they're both really fascinating relationships, and that triangle itself that kind of forms in the book was to me a fun triangle because it wasn't just like, oh, I like this guy and you like him too. It was to me it was something much more than that, and really to me the kind of sacred point of that triangle was Nadia and Aubrey. Like that was to me the like elbow of that. I don't know what the like the crux of a triangle is called. Obviously, I have not thought about geometry in so long. The like little, but that like that part of the triangle, to me, the part that was sacred and that you didn't want to see like broken is Nadia and
Mhm.
Aubrey. It doesn't have to do with the relationship either of them have with this guy. That to me was like the sacred part of the triangle.
Agreed, agreed. I really felt like both of them needed like a girlfriend. Like they were both just they needed I don't know, some feminine guidance and energy in their lives. I agree.
Yes.
One of my favorite parts about the mothers is the way you use the elder women of the church as like kind of like the Greek chorus of a play. How did you come up with that? Like having them kind of narrate in this very like church gossipy way, but still like carrying the story. Where'd that inspiration come from?
It came very late in the process of writing the book. I think before there was kind of a sort of general sense that I was writing the book that the voice it didn't feel like it was the characters themselves narrating. It felt so much older. It felt like it was coming from some kind of other place.
Mhm.
So I think that that was always kind of there. But as I got deeper into working on the book, I kept thinking, what if I located that voice in characters that exist within the world of the book? They move and they see things and they comment on them. And then the idea of the church mothers kind of came to me, of these older women who are observing the lives of these younger women and are judging them, and they're commenting on them, and they're actually affecting the kind of events within the story. So it came out pretty late. I think it picked up on threads that were already existing in the story. It just felt like a kind of a fresh way, and a fun way for me as I was working on that book when I was, 20, in my early 20s. So the idea of me trying to throw my voice in a way and kind of channel the voice of these 80-year-old women was really fun, I think. And to think about how an 80-year-old woman might judge a 20-year-old. So being able to throw my voice kind of in both directions, I think ended up being really fun for me.
Right, right. And it's done a little bit in The Vanishing Half is too. There's like this town voice that kind of carries and narrates the story, even when the reader often like knows more than them, even when I can like say, oh, well, the town gossip is not correct.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. So both of these books really hinge on like one person's choice and how that affects generations to come. So my question is, in either book, do you think Stella or Nadia regrets that choice, regrets that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated because on one hand, when I think about regret, I'm just like, I regret everything. Like I'm constantly thinking, like, should I
Read it
have done that? The idea of living life with no regret is something that's very foreign to me. I envy people who can move through the world in that way.
I don't
Because I'm constantly,
it's not
I'm
really
constantly second guessing, I'm second guessing things that I've said. And did I say something stupid that time that I said something that person didn't really laugh? And, should I have gone to college here? Like I'm constantly thinking in that
right.
way. But I also think that in this, for the sake of fiction, I don't know that regret is that interesting of an emotion to kind of stay in. I think that there's a way in which regret can be kind of flattened as you're writing about it. So I want to write towards, I guess, maybe a more complex kind of vision of that. And thinking about these characters who are making decisions, and whether they regret those decisions or not, those are their choices to make those decisions. Like I find the idea of being able to make a choice to be more empowering, regardless of how you feel about it after. Like
Mhm.
am like, when I think about my life, I'm just like, the thing that terrifies me is the idea of getting to the end of your life and realizing that you didn't really live for you, that you were
Mm,
constantly trying to please other people or constantly trying to conform to what the world wanted you to be, and you didn't do the things that you want to do. That terrifies me way more than the idea of like I made the wrong choice somewhere. Like
right.
the idea of not making a choice is scarier to me. So
Mhm.
I want to think about these characters making these big bold choices and how they want to live and living through the consequences of that, whatever they may be. And I think that that's what I actually kind of love about Stella and Nadia, that both of them are kind of unapologetic about the choices that they've made, which I
Right.
love. I just love the idea of making a choice, and regardless of whether those consequences are good for you or bad for you, just standing that choice that you made because it was the best that you could do for where you were at that time, and honoring that.
Right, right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Even going back to the Vanishing Half, I feel like even when Stella's secret is coming closer and closer, like coming out, she still does everything that she can to keep it a secret, even after having a discussion with her like daughter about it. So, um, yeah, yeah. Let's see. A sort of general question. Do you have a favorite text or author that has influenced your writing?
I think it's a hard question to answer, just because there's so many books that I love. But
Hmm.
I think, yeah, I mean, I have a lot that I love. I think about, you mentioned Jasmine Ward earlier. I love her work. I think about people like Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston and Alice Walker and some of the sort of historical greats. I think about more contemporary writers. Really excited for the new Colson Whitehead book that's coming out, I think, this
Hmm.
fall. Um, there's lots of young up and coming writers I really love. So yeah, I mean, I think all of those people are writers that I consider myself either influenced by or maybe hopefully in conversation with.
Okay. Nice. So the covers of both of these, I didn't realize, but they are both like shapes. They're silhouettes of women on this, and the mothers. I don't know if anyone else noticed. I just think they're gorgeous. Can I ask how much input you had on like these kind of cover designs?
Very little. I just got very lucky that that there were really talented artists working on the covers for both of them. I know with the cover of the mothers, it was the artist. It was her first like attempt at the book cover. I think she just kind of knocked it out of the
Oh wow.
park on her first
Yeah,
try.
gorgeous.
And I don't know, and I don't know about exactly all the process for the Vanishing Half, but yeah, I loved exactly what you pointed out. I loved the idea that they were abstract and colorful, but evoked the shapes of women in a way that makes it feel, I guess maybe warm in a way.
Mhm.
And I also love that they are not the same cover, but they kind of call back to one another in a really cool way. So yeah, I just got totally lucky that I've had really amazing and talented artists work on my book jackets.
Yeah, they're absolutely gorgeous. I feel like Bookstagram has been having like a field day, especially with the Vanishing Half because it's gorgeous. Let's see. So, what do you hope people take away from reading the Vanishing Half? How would you like people to further their thinking on the concept of race and specifically whiteness? If seeing as Stella can perform whiteness.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, my kind of takeaway in writing the book was just that identity is complicated, and that maybe seems really trite, but I think that that was one of the things I kept returning to as I was working on this book, and in all of its forms. I think even as a person who spends a lot of time thinking about identity, there are ways in which I find myself often simplifying identities of other people or even my own identities of wanting to
Mhm.
kind of condense myself or condense people I know into things that are very easily digestible and easily summarized.
Right.
And what I experienced kind of writing this book was the fact that, our language is a lot simpler than our identities actually are. Like there are ways in which the complexity of our identity kind of pushes up against the rather or frequently straightforwardness of our language. And it's, we make do to some extent with the language that we have, but that doesn't mean that our identities have to be sort of fit inside of it. It doesn't have to be conformed to it, even if you don't know the way to talk about it. And, I've run up against that and several times in talking about this book, of having to think about how I talk about this book. And one example is Stella's daughter, Kennedy. I still have not quite settled on how to describe Kennedy's race for the sake of this book. And, I had somebody who read the book and described Kennedy as, functionally white with Black heritage. And I laughed and I was like, yeah, I think that's technically accurate, but I would never probably use that language. I just don't think that would not have ever come naturally to me. But that type of language to describe, what do you call the daughter, of a white passing mother, and has a white father, and she grows up, there's not a neat term for that to kind of contain the complexity of the way that she thinks about race and the way that she moves through race. And that's it's, I think, important to recognize that that's a limitation of language. It's not a limitation of who she is or how her life turns out to be. It's the fact that we don't necessarily have a readily available language to describe that. And that's a function of the language. It doesn't mean that her identity is simpler than what it is. And I think it's been an important reminder for me, like I said, as I think about myself and as I think about how I'm interacting with other people, that just because my language is limited does not mean that person's identity is.
Right. It's funny because Kennedy pretty much rejects it. The fact that she is partly a Black woman. I remember that scene very clearly where she's like, well, just because my mom is doesn't mean. It's like, well, kind of does, but you, just like you said, you were raised as
yes and no, right? Yeah, both of those, I think both of those things are true. I understand Jude being like, well, we have our mothers are genetically, the same.
We're related.
Yeah, I'm Black, you are. I understood where Jude was coming from in that standpoint, and why she was so and why I think readers are probably very put off by Kennedy's reaction. But at the same time, I understand Kennedy being like, I'm not Black. I have never known myself to be Black. I don't have Black family members. I have never been a part of a Black community. I understand why for her that's something that she rejects. And I also understand how Jude takes that and how readers are going to take that too. I think it's one of those things where yes, both of those things are true. They're both right in that moment. And I think that's what is writing those types of moments I find so fun and also challenging, challenging for myself, even as the writer, to kind of sit in this place where I think that they're both right, even though there are ways that you react to it emotionally as just a person in the world too.
Yeah, agreed. Kennedy, I didn't like her at first, but I understand. I understand. So let's see. So this summer, The Vanishing Half got picked up by HBO for a limited series. Congratulations. Anything you can share? Are there any updates? I feel like that was in June.
Yeah, no updates. We're still in a very early stage of kind of assembling the creative team surrounding it. I'm very excited for the people we've brought on board. But I think at this point it's kind of up to the development gods. It's not something that I have a lot of information about or a lot of influence about. I am one of the producers, so I'm participating.
Nice.
But I think as these things go, you just kind of wait to hear drips of news here and there. So no big announcements, but I'm very excited by the people that we've brought on board, and I hope that it's a project that we can see on the big screen someday.
Nice. Yeah, I can't wait. I'm especially interested to see who gets to play the twins. Are you writing anything next or right now that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I'm working on my third book. It's a book about music, and it's been really fun to write about a very different world than The Vanishing Half, and a very different world than the one in which we are currently living. Writing about a world of parties and glamour and concerts. It's been nice for me, I think, emotionally, to be able to spend some time in that space.
Nice. Did you say it was nonfiction or fiction?
It's fiction.
Okay. Lovely. All right. I think I'm going to switch over to the audience questions now. Let's see. So the first question we have here is, this is a good one. How would you compare your work with Toni Morrison's, if you think there is an apt comparison?
I mean, that's like asking, like, yeah, you play basketball. How do you compare to LeBron James or somebody like we play the same sport? Like, I cannot even begin to do that. I just think I think that it feels so banal to say that you admire Toni Morrison because she's one of the greatest
Right, she's Toni
writers
Morrison.
who have ever written. But I think for me, it was I just loved kind of growing up with her work. I think her work is so strange. I don't think we talk enough about how strange it is. She doesn't write about kind of everyman characters. Like, she writes about people that are always a little off kilter. She writes about worlds that always feel a little off kilter, and writes about them beautifully, of course, and writes about kind of the weight of history. And I think that that's something that I'm interested in also, the kind of weight of history and these stories of communities, I think, is something that I'm also really interested in. But I think she's amazing, and I think that her work was influential to me as it is to, I assume, every generation of Black writers who will follow mine and the people not yet born. So I think that that's yeah, she's a writer that I deeply admire, and I so grateful to have briefly spent time on the same planet that she was on, and I'm also so glad that we have her work to continue to read and enjoy.
Okay. The next question says, which of the characters in Vanishing Half might you most identify with, or aspects of these characters?
Yeah, I think that's also a hard question because I think, like, for me, when I'm writing, there's always fragments of me that end up somewhere, and
Right.
often where you least expect it. So usually, if I set out to write the character that I think is going to be like me, they're nothing, or they're less like me than the character who I think has nothing in common with me. I think in the case of this book, I think that I definitely probably most a kind of Stella Jude combination.
Mhm.
I think Jude is, someone who's very ambitious. I think that she's also feels things very deeply. I think I am both of those ways. And I think Stella is somebody who's very interior, and I think I can be sort of interior and guarded. And I think also Stella has this very kind of, you know, big sort of, she wants to go her own way and do her own thing. And
Mhm.
I definitely feel that way, of wanting to kind of set out and make a choice and go your own way. So I think I have that element. I think that that's probably part of me that made it into her as well.
Okay. Let's see. Was it hard to be woke in SoCal coming up?
I mean, I don't know. I don't even really know. I think, it was interesting kind of growing up. I think I grew up in Oceanside, which is part of San Diego County. It's a military town. It's a very racially diverse town because of the military. So I had, experiences of kind of growing up in this very multicultural place. And then I went to college, at Stanford. I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is like 70% white. I spent time in these
Mhm.
also very white spaces. So I think that I always had a pretty complex understanding of race based on all of those experiences of going from this kind of multicultural military town to this very mostly, white and wealthy enclave of Silicon Valley, and then going to the Midwest for a bit. And now I'm in New York. I live in a Black neighborhood in New York. So I've always had kind of these experiences of race that have been complex and dynamic. I never thought of it and don't think of it as necessarily wokeness. I don't completely know what people mean when they use that term. I feel like people mean different things depending on who you talk to. So I don't know what this reader means. But I think that, yeah, I think my understanding of race has been complex and unfolding and dynamic, and and that's something that I try to also, I think, explore in my writing.
Nice, nice. And I also just have some comments from the chat, in case you haven't seen them. A comment that says, "Thank you for sharing your genius, a great gift, and the psychological and cultural richness in both of your works is outstanding." So,
Thank you.
next question: how do the men in that community view the twins? So the men from The Vanishing Half.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. I think as far as the men in Mallard, I think the dynamic of that was kind of interesting to me because, Desiree kind of rejects the men that, or at least the boys that she grows up with. Like, she very much does not want to do the thing that she is supposed to do, which is marry a
Mhm.
nice Mallard boy. um, and the fact that she knows that she's supposed to do it makes it very unappealing to her. So I think that, generally the men in this town, you see that a little bit when they're girls, and then when Desiree returns back, I think that they think, they view them as, kind of the prize of the town in a way. They're
Mhm.
descendants of the founder of the town, and they are exactly as light skinned as they should be. And there's like that element of it. But also, I think that there is something, they view them that there's something kind of unhinged about them when they become women. The fact that Desiree has done this, Stella has done this thing that people think is crazy because she has decided to live as white. So there's something off about her for doing that. And then Desiree has done something that they view as kind of equally crazy, or perhaps more crazy, by deciding to actually marry a dark-skinned man. So I think there's a kind of a trajectory of that, the way that they begin thinking of them as kind of the success of the social experiment, and then later they see them as something has gone off the tracks. Like, these girls were supposed to be the kind of prize of this town, and they have both gone off the tracks in different ways.
Yeah. All right. Next question. How is it that Stella, who did not want to bring attention to herself, found herself being so racially vocal about the Black family moving into her neighborhood?
I think it's something that she has to kind of muster, and it comes from, to me, it was always like a fear reaction, Like, at this point, Stella is kind of in survival mode, and it's just like, it's either, if I'm someone who doesn't want to draw a lot of attention to myself, but somebody is coming towards me with a gun, I'm gonna scream my head off, So that is like, it's that emotional equivalent for her of like, I have built this kind of successful house of cards, and here comes something that's threatening to topple it down. And I think also the thing about Stella at this point is like, I think, for me at least, to understand her survival mode, there's like a feeling of her that once she has made this choice, at this point she has been living in this life for, however many years, there's a feeling in her that she cannot go back. So if for whatever reason she gets exposed and her marriage, crumbles, and she loses her child, I think sometimes people think of the kind of consequences of that, of like, it's life or death. Her husband could be enraged and he could kill. Like, there's a
Right.
possibility of those types of things happening, but there's also the possibility, and what I think Stella is more afraid of, is she loses her husband and her child, and she has also lost her family too. So,
Mhm.
like, she has made this choice to leave behind her mother and her sister in her town. She has gone to this new world, and if she loses that new world, she will be left out here with nothing. And I think that that's what she is really afraid of, is that possibility. So, that's what I think, that she is kind of facing this existential threat at the point where she learns
Mhm.
that this Black family's moved in. That's how she perceives it. So that's why she reacts in this very vocal way. And then, as we said earlier, later she finds that like, in spite of facing that existential threat, she finds herself doing things that are completely dangerous and completely illogical considering what she's faced. But she finds herself drawn to that because she is trying to find something else that she has been missing, so far in her life. So I think I really thought of it as that, as Stella feels that she is in sort of mortal danger, really, with this Black family moving in, that threatens to lose everything. She's risked everything to have the life that she's living now, and now she's
Mhm.
threatening to lose that too.
Right. Right. Also about the vanishing half, Stella and Desiree being identical twins puts an interesting nature versus nurture lens on the novel. Given that both sisters have the same nature, what propels them to go on such different paths?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the questions that I found really interesting in working this book, was that idea of nature versus nurture. And, to me, it's like, yeah, obviously it's both things that shape us.
Mhm.
I think that for them, I kept thinking about, what would kind of set them on their trajectories, and what element of that was innate to just kind of who they are, and what element of it was the things that they experience. And there are some things that they experience together, and there are other things that they experience separately, and that ends up shaping them, I think, in some big ways. And there are also things that they experience together but react to very differently, and that kind of sets them
Mhm.
also, I think, on their path. So I always find that to be a really fascinating question of, people who were raised by the same parents and grew up under the same conditions, but turn out to be very different people. I think anyone who has siblings has thought about that at one point or another. Like, how did
Right.
we turn out to be, how did I turn out here and you turned up there? We were raised in the same place, kind of the same way. But I think it's something that's, I think, just fascinating about human nature and how we, become the people we become. There's an element of it that's probably innate, and there's also an element of it that's just we are the choices that we've made in our life, and these twins end up making
Mm.
ultimately very different choices.
Right, right. That's very true. They experience a lot of the same trauma, but they experience it differently. It sends them on different paths. Yeah. Let's see. So you mentioned wondering where the lives of the twins' children may lead. Would you ever consider a sequel in the story world that you've created?
Yeah, I get asked about this often. It's hard for me to imagine that only because I think once I've finished a book, I kind of have moved on
Hmm.
emotionally. Even talking about the mothers, I haven't talked about the mothers in so long. So
Oh,
even like
really?
talking about the
Hmm.
mothers, yeah, just talking about the mothers right now was like I was thinking about, oh yeah, I miss Aubrey, like had like that kind of emotional feeling of like, well, yeah, I do miss I really do miss these characters who I spent 10 years of my life with, and then
Right.
you kind of move on from. So I think there's a part of me that kind of feels done when I am done. But I do think that if I were to do this, it would probably be looking at, yeah, like that next generation of the book and what happens to Kennedy and Jude and their children and what happens one generation beyond. But I don't think so, but I'll never say never. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely be interested to see about Jude. I feel like Kennedy, we saw like her acting career a lot, but for sure, I would love to see where they end up. That would be very interesting. All right. I was on the edge thinking Sam would hunt her down in Mallard, talking about Desiree. Did he ever go to Mallard in earlier drafts?
He never went to Mallard in earlier drafts, but you did find out more about what came of Sam. um,
Hmm.
and then again, as I worked on it, I think so much of thinking about editing and revising is just like, what do I really care about as a writer, and what do I want you to really care about as a reader? And I cared less about what Sam was doing, like Sam and his new marriage, and like I think you get like glimpses of it a little bit, but I was like, oh, should I, have Jude find him and like spend time with him and her, and I was just like,
Hmm.
I don't really care. Um, so I never saw a version where that happened. But I did have more Sam. And I think that these types of questions, I think, are also fun questions for thinking about the TV show of like, yeah, could we
Hmm.
get glimpses of Sam and a TV show? And that could be done maybe in a way that's more interesting than what I was thinking of. But I never saw him actually successfully finding her. I think of this book in lots of ways as kind of a fake detective story because there are lots of characters that are kind of set out on these quests of finding people. And few of them are really successful. And the one that is, it's kind of by accident.
Yeah, she
So
didn't even mean to.
yeah, there's nobody like no one is a great detective in this book, and it's kind of a fake detective story. But to me, like that setting people out on that kind of quest and then kind of pulling the rug from under you a little bit and sending you in spiraling in a different direction. That was something that was just kind of fun for me as I was writing the book.
Yeah, yeah. I really like how it's a little clueless the men in the Vanishing Half end up being, other than Early, who is very involved. But I enjoyed that. All right. It seems to me that the two core themes of the Vanishing Half are generational trauma and internalized race dynamics. What does the novel say about these themes, and how can we place them in conversation with current events?
Oh, that's a lot of parts
Big
of
question.
that's a big question. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that those are certainly two of the themes that I was thinking about of, what we inherit from our parents and how what we do with it. And whether that's inheriting sort of a toxic ideology like colorism and passing it on, or whether that's inheriting, the violence that your parents have experienced that you don't really have context for understanding. So I think that was certainly one of the things I was thinking about. And in thinking about colorism and the way in which that not only affects how we treat other people, but also how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our own bodies. And how do we then unlearn that? How do we unlearn it so we don't treat other people badly, but also how we unlearn it so we don't treat ourselves badly. And that to me was like kind of a big question to think about, kind of in unraveling the book. So yeah, I don't know exactly how it relates to current events. I'm sure people can have their own interpretations about that. I didn't think about this book really in light of any current event because I was
Mm,
setting this book, 50 years back or whatever when I started working on it. And I was working on this book over 4 or 5 years. So there wasn't one current event that kind of set it off. But I think the fact that people I think are reading it against current events says more about this moment in time than it does about anything that I did particularly with the
mm.
book. So I'm sure people will have their different interpretations about that, but I think that those were two things that felt really complex in thinking about this story, and two questions that I wanted to stay with as I was writing it.
Okay. Did any of your characters get away from you and go in a direction that you totally didn't plan for?
I think all of them did at some point, and I think that that to me is the fun part about writing is when you
Mhm.
surprise yourself. I think it can be easy to set out and think, "Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that." I always have these kind of plans, and then a character will completely surprise you and do something unexpected. So I think that they all did in various ways, and
Mhm.
that to me was the most fun part of writing the book.
Nice, nice. My last question, yes, last question that I have here says, why did you choose to give Jude a white transgender partner?
Well, Reese is not white, he's black.
Yeah.
And I really loved the relationship between them. I thought that these were two characters who both came from, had difficult childhoods. They both grew up learning a lot of shame surrounding their bodies. And they are
Mhm.
both characters who uh, find it difficult to trust. And the idea of two characters that are kind of coming from this place, finding each other and becoming friends, and then becoming more than friends, that felt just really kind of alive to me. Of thinking about how do these two people learn how to trust each other, learn how to love each other, and learn how to allow themselves to be loved. So to me, it really came from that place of just finding that character, those character kind of dynamics in that relationship to be one that felt really just yeah, I felt moved by I was as I was working through it and thinking about how will these two people find a way to trust each other. They're both
Mhm.
kind of wary of that, and I think those types of relationships, I think it's true also of Desiree and Early. It's certainly true of Desiree and Early, that they're both these characters that are kind of like they've both been hurt, they both are hesitant to trust somebody, and in spite of that, they find themselves falling in love. I think that's the kind of crux of any good love story is these people, there are reasons why they will have challenges as a couple, but in spite of it, they're drawn to each other. I think
Mhm.
that's true of Reese and Jude, and it's certainly true of Desiree and Early too.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for pointing out that. Yeah, Reese is lighter than Jude, but he is still a black man.
Yes.
All right, I think that's all the questions that we have from the audience. So thank you again so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll all be looking out for The Vanishing Half on HBO.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, of course. All right. Let's see. Thank you to the audience for joining tonight. And we hope you join the Savannah Book Festival again on February 10th for Larry Loftus as he discusses his latest book, The Princess Spy. Be sure to check out the website, savannahbookfestival.org, for registration information. Thanks again for joining us, guys, and have a good night.